The 911 call came in at 2:34 a.m., armed gunman holding a family of 4 hostage in their own home, threatening to kill them if police approached. Dispatcher Jennifer Walsh was supposed to gather information and coordinate law enforcement response. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone listening. She took control of the conversation with psychological techniques that could only come from someone who had spent 14 years as an FBI crisis negotiator, talking armed criminals out of violence when bullets couldn't solve the problem. When lives hang in the balance and bullets can't solve the crisis, heroes don't always carry guns. Sometimes they carry headsets and use words as weapons to disarm the most dangerous minds. Before we dive into this intense story of crisis psychology, federal negotiation training, and the agent who never stopped talking people back from the edge, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like Jennifer's prove that the most powerful weapons are sometimes the ones we can't see, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who fight battles in frequencies only they can hear. Jennifer Walsh had been working as a 911 dispatcher for Metro Emergency Services for exactly 5 years, 8 months, and 14 days. To her colleagues in the dispatch center, she was a veteran operator who could handle any type of emergency call with calm professionalism and an uncanny ability to keep callers composed during their worst moments. What her fellow dispatchers didn't know was that Jennifer's seemingly supernatural skill at managing crisis communications came from 14 years as an FBI crisis negotiator, where she had been trained in advanced psychology, behavioral analysis, and the precise art of using conversation to prevent violence. When traditional law enforcement methods had reached their limits, Jennifer had joined the FBI in 2006 after completing advanced degrees in psychology and criminal justice, specializing in crisis intervention and hostage negotiation. Before we dive into this intense story of crisis psychology, federal negotiation training, and the agent who never stopped talking people back from the edge, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like Jennifer's prove that the most powerful weapons are sometimes the ones we can't see, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who fight battles in frequencies only they can hear. Jennifer Walsh had been working as a 911 dispatcher for Metro Emergency Services for exactly 5 years, 8 months, and 14 days. The FBI Crisis Response Team represented the pinnacle of psychological law enforcement, requiring agents who could combine deep understanding of criminal psychology with the communication skills necessary to manipulate dangerous situations through conversation alone. For 14 years, Jennifer had been deployed to hostage situations, barricaded subject incidents, and crisis scenarios where armed individuals threatened to commit violence against themselves or others. Jennifer had learned to read voice patterns for emotional state, to identify psychological triggers that could escalate or de-escalate violence, and to guide conversations toward outcomes that preserved life even when subjects seemed determined to cause death. Jennifer's training had included advanced coursework in abnormal psychology, criminal behavior analysis, and specialized communication techniques that were classified within federal law enforcement. Crisis negotiators were taught to think like their subjects, to understand the psychological factors that drove people to take hostages, and to use that understanding to guide conversations toward peaceful resolution. Jennifer's first major case had involved a domestic violence situation where an armed husband had barricaded himself with his wife and 3 children, threatening murder-suicide if police attempted entry. Jennifer had spent 8 hours on the phone with the subject, gradually building rapport while simultaneously gathering intelligence about his psychological state and the tactical situation inside the residence. The negotiation had required Jennifer to balance multiple psychological factors: the subject's emotional instability, his history of domestic violence, his access to weapons, and the immediate danger to his family members. Using techniques learned during FBI training, Jennifer had gradually shifted the conversation from the subject's grievances to his love for his children, eventually convincing him to release the hostages and surrender peacefully. Jennifer's second major deployment had taken her to a bank robbery scenario where armed subjects had taken 12 employees hostage during what was supposed to be a simple robbery. The situation had escalated when police response prevented the robbers' escape, transforming a property crime into a potential mass casualty incident. Jennifer had negotiated with the lead robber for 14 hours, using psychological profiling to identify his primary motivations and fears. The subject was more concerned about his family's financial security than his own survival, allowing Jennifer to focus the conversation on how peaceful surrender could protect his family from the consequences of his criminal actions. Jennifer's most challenging case had occurred during her final year with the FBI, when she was assigned to a school shooting scenario where the gunman had barricaded himself in a classroom with 17 students. The subject was suffering from severe mental illness and had a history of threatening behavior that had been ignored by school administrators. The negotiation had required Jennifer to manage multiple simultaneous conversations with a gunman, with the students who could communicate through text messages, and with tactical teams who were preparing for possible forced entry. Jennifer had used advanced crisis psychology to identify the shooter's underlying psychological needs, gradually guiding him away from violence while coordinating student evacuation through methods that didn't trigger his paranoid delusions. The successful resolution had saved 17 young lives. But the psychological toll of spending 6 hours inside the mind of someone planning mass murder had convinced Jennifer that she needed to transition away from federal crisis work. The constant exposure to extreme violence and psychological pathology had accumulated over 14 years of operations, and Jennifer recognized that she needed to find a way to use her skills in an environment that didn't require her to inhabit the darkest corners of human psychology. When Jennifer transitioned from FBI crisis negotiation to 911 dispatch, she had deliberately chosen emergency communications as a way to continue helping people in crisis while reducing the psychological intensity of federal law enforcement work. For 5 years, the strategy had worked. Jennifer found satisfaction in coordinating emergency responses, helping people during medical emergencies, and using her communication skills to manage routine crisis situations without the life or death pressures of federal hostage negotiation. The dispatchers at Metro Emergency Services knew Jennifer as unusually effective during crisis calls. Someone who could calm panic callers and extract critical information with communication techniques that seemed almost professional. When domestic violence calls required extended phone contact, Jennifer could keep victims safe while coordinating police response. During suicide intervention calls, Jennifer used conversation techniques that kept subjects talking until mental health professionals could arrive. What they couldn't see was how Jennifer unconsciously analyzed every crisis call for psychological indicators, how she automatically identified behavioral patterns that suggested escalation potential, or how she maintained the emotional discipline required for crisis psychology work, even years after leaving federal service. The crisis call that would reveal Jennifer's background came through her console at 2:34 a.m. on a Thursday morning, When the emergency dispatch center was operating with minimal staffing and maximum vulnerability to complex incidents that required specialized response. 9/11. What is your emergency? The voice that answered was male, agitated, and immediately triggered every warning sign Jennifer had learned to recognize during 14 years of crisis negotiation. My name is David Martinez. Jennifer found satisfaction in coordinating emergency responses, helping people during medical emergencies, and using her communication skills to manage routine crisis situations without the life or death pressures of federal hostage negotiation. The dispatchers at Metro Emergency Services knew Jennifer as unusually effective during crisis calls. Someone who could calm panic callers and extract critical information with communication techniques that seemed almost professional. When domestic violence calls required extended phone contact, Jennifer could keep victims safe while coordinating police response. I have a gun, and I have a family in this house. If any cops try to come in here, I'm going to kill all of them and then kill myself. Jennifer's FBI training activated before her conscious mind could process the full implications of the call. This wasn't a standard emergency requiring police dispatch. This was an active hostage situation with multiple civilian lives at immediate risk and a subject displaying psychological indicators consistent with murder-suicide intent. David, my name is Jennifer. I can hear that you're upset about something. Can you help me understand what's happening? Jennifer's response demonstrated immediate departure from standard 911 dispatch protocols. Instead of gathering location information and coordinating police response, Jennifer was implementing crisis negotiation techniques designed to establish rapport and gather psychological intelligence about the subject's mental state. You don't understand anything. Martinez responded. They're trying to take my kids away. Social services, my ex-wife, the whole system is against me. If I can't have my family, nobody can. Jennifer recognized the psychological profile immediately. Divorced father with custody disputes, history of conflict with family court system, perceived persecution by authority figures, and access to his children during a crisis that had pushed him beyond his coping mechanisms. This was a textbook domestic violence hostage situation requiring immediate crisis intervention. David, it sounds like you love your children very much. What are their names? Jennifer was using a classic crisis negotiation technique, redirecting the subject's focus from his grievances to his emotional connection with the hostages, while simultaneously gathering intelligence about the family composition and his relationship with the victims. Emma and Carlos. They are 8 and 10. They don't understand what's happening. They are scared. Jennifer noted the subject's awareness of his children's emotional state, suggesting that parental protective instincts could be leveraged during negotiation. She also observed that Martinez was providing specific information about the hostages, indicating a level of cooperation that could be developed through skilled conversation management. Emma and Carlos are lucky to have a father who cares about them so much. Are they safe right now? David. Jennifer was conducting psychological assessment while simultaneously gathering tactical intelligence. The question about safety was designed to determine the immediate threat level while reinforcing Martinez's identity as a protective father rather than a dangerous criminal. They are in the living room with their mother. I'm not going to hurt them unless the police try something stupid. But if they come in here, everyone dies. Jennifer identified multiple psychological factors that could be used during negotiation. Martinez's protective feelings toward his children, his anger toward authority figures, and his conditional threats that suggested he could be guided toward peaceful resolution if his psychological needs were addressed appropriately. Jennifer activated the emergency console's silent alarm system to notify supervisors that she was managing an active hostage situation, but instead of transferring the call to police negotiators, Jennifer made the tactical decision to maintain primary contact with Martinez while federal crisis specialists were contacted. David, I understand that you feel like the system is being unfair to you. She also observed that Martinez was providing specific information about the hostages, indicating a level of cooperation that could be developed through skilled conversation management. Emma and Carlos are lucky to have a father who cares about them so much. Are they safe right now? David. Jennifer was conducting psychological assessment while simultaneously gathering tactical intelligence. The question about safety was designed to determine the immediate threat level while reinforcing Martinez's identity as a protective father rather than a dangerous criminal. They're in the living room with their mother. I'm not going to hurt them unless the police try something stupid. That must be incredibly frustrating for someone who just wants to be a good father. Jennifer was using validation techniques to build psychological rapport while identifying Martinez's core emotional grievances. Crisis negotiation required understanding the subject's perspective without endorsing their actions, creating emotional connection that could be used to guide behavior. Over the next hour, Jennifer conducted a masterclass in crisis psychology, using techniques that gradually shifted Martinez's focus from his anger toward the system to his love for his children. Jennifer identified that Martinez was not a career criminal or psychologically disturbed individual, but rather a father who had been pushed beyond his emotional limits by circumstances he felt powerless to control. Jennifer learned that Martinez had lost his job 3 months earlier, fallen behind on child support payments, and been threatened with loss of visitation rights by family court. His ex-wife had filed restraining orders that prevented him from seeing his children except during supervised visits, and Martinez had taken the children during what was supposed to be a routine custody exchange. David, it sounds like you just want to spend time with Emma and Carlos. What would it look like if you could see them whenever you wanted? Jennifer was using future-oriented questioning to guide Martinez away from his current crisis toward consideration of long-term solutions that didn't involve violence. Crisis negotiation often succeeded by helping subjects visualize positive outcomes that were incompatible with destructive actions. I just want them to know that I love them. I want to be part of their lives, but everyone is telling me I'm a bad father, that I'm dangerous. Jennifer recognized the core psychological issue. Martinez's sense of identity as a father was being threatened by legal proceedings and social judgments, driving him to prove his parental commitment through dramatic action that demonstrated the depth of his love while simultaneously destroying any possibility of future relationship with his children. David, Emma, and Carlos already know you love them. They can see it every day. But right now, they need you to show them that you can keep them safe and make good decisions for their future. Jennifer was redirecting Martinez's protective instincts from dramatic gesture toward practical parenting responsibilities, using his love for his children to guide him toward behavior that would actually serve their best interests. The negotiation continued for 2 more hours, with Jennifer gradually building Martinez's trust while simultaneously coordinating with arriving SWAT teams and federal crisis specialists who had been contacted through FBI channels. Jennifer's former colleagues recognized her voice and work pattern. allowing seamless coordination between a crisis communication and tactical teams preparing for possible forced entry. Jennifer's psychological assessment indicated that Martinez was not planning murder-suicide, but rather was attempting to force attention to his custody situation through dramatic action. His threats were conditional rather than inevitable, and his emotional attachment to his children provided leverage for peaceful resolution. The breakthrough came when Jennifer convinced Martinez that surrender would demonstrate his fitness as a father rather than proving his unfitness. By reframing his situation from losing his children forever to protecting his children's future, Jennifer guided Martinez toward voluntary surrender that preserved his relationship with his children and his own psychological well-being. David, Emma, and Carlos are going to remember this day for the rest of their lives. What do you want them to remember about their father? The question forced Martinez to consider his actions from his children's perspective, activating his parental protective instincts in ways that favored peaceful resolution over violent confrontation. Martinez surrendered peacefully after 3 hours and 47 minutes of negotiation, releasing his children and ex-wife unharmed while accepting arrest without resistance. The psychological intervention had prevented what could have been a murder-suicide involving multiple victims and had preserved the family relationships that Martinez had been trying to protect through his actions. The investigation that followed revealed that Jennifer had managed one of the most successful crisis negotiations in regional law enforcement history. Her psychological assessment had been accurate. Her communication techniques had been textbook federal-level crisis intervention, and her coordination with tactical teams had demonstrated expertise that could only come from extensive federal training. Jennifer's supervisor, who had worked with her for 5 years without knowing her federal background, was amazed to learn that the veteran dispatcher was a former FBI crisis negotiator with 14 years of hostage resolution experience. Jennifer, why didn't you ever mention your FBI background? Jennifer looked around the dispatch center where she had worked quietly for 5 years, using her federal training to help people during routine emergencies without the psychological intensity of federal crisis work. I thought my crisis negotiation days were over, Jennifer replied. But some skills are too important to abandon completely. The Metro Emergency Services offered Jennifer promotion to Supervisor of Crisis Communications, where her FBI training could be used to enhance dispatch protocols and train other operators in crisis psychology techniques. The psychological intervention had prevented what could have been a murder-suicide involving multiple victims and had preserved the family relationships that Martinez had been trying to protect through his actions. The investigation that followed revealed that Jennifer had managed one of the most successful crisis negotiations in regional law enforcement history. Jennifer accepted the position while maintaining her primary role as a 911 dispatcher, allowing her to continue helping people in crisis while sharing her expertise with colleagues who face similar challenges. The most significant change was the implementation of enhanced crisis training for emergency dispatchers. Based on Jennifer's recommendations about psychological techniques that could be adapted from federal law enforcement to civilian emergency services, Jennifer helped develop new protocols that improved outcomes for domestic violence calls, suicide interventions, and other crisis situations that required advanced communication skills. 6 months after the Martinez incident, Jennifer was approached by federal agencies that wanted to recruit her back to crisis negotiation. But she chose to remain with Metro Emergency Services while accepting consulting positions that allowed her to train other emergency dispatchers in crisis psychology without returning to the psychological intensity of federal hostage work. Jennifer's experience led to nationwide improvements in emergency dispatch training, with her psychological techniques being adopted by 911 centers across the country. Her methods had proven that crisis negotiation skills could be successfully adapted to civilian emergency services, improving outcomes for thousands of crisis calls that might otherwise have ended tragically. Jennifer Walsh never sought media attention for her actions during the Martinez crisis. The psychological techniques she had used involved sensitive federal methods that could potentially be exploited by future criminals. And Jennifer understood that operational security required keeping certain capabilities private even after successful operations. But the family that went home safely that morning, and the dozens of other families who benefited from Jennifer's crisis training over the following years, represented victories in battles that most people never knew were being fought. Jennifer had proven that some federal skills were too valuable to abandon after government service, and that the most effective crisis resolution often came from people who understood that words could be more powerful than weapons. Metro Emergency Services implemented Jennifer's crisis protocols across their entire system, and other 911 centers began recruiting former federal crisis specialists for senior dispatcher positions. Jennifer's experience had shown that protecting communities from crisis situations required personnel who understood both emergency communications and the advanced psychology needed to guide desperate people away from irreversible decisions. So I ask you, have you ever called 911 and found yourself talking to someone whose calm competence during your worst moment suggested training that went far beyond routine emergency dispatch? Someone whose voice made you feel safe when everything else was falling apart? Share their story in the comments. Because here at the Human Stories, we believe that our safety during crisis often depends on guardians whose psychological weapons protect us from dangers we never see coming. Thank you for watching. If Jennifer's story moved you, please subscribe and share this video. Help us honor those who carry their crisis training into civilian emergency services, ready to deploy psychological expertise when desperate situations require more than standard protocols, proving that the most important battles are sometimes fought entirely with words. Until next time, remember, the person answering your emergency call might once have been the one talking armed criminals into surrender. Sometimes the most powerful weapons are carried by those who understand that conversation can be deadlier than bullets.